foreign power had done this to us through the educational system, we would have viewed it as an act of war. We should view it as an act of war. These people were trying to enslave us.
We're in some very interesting times.
It's just a total repudiation of everything that God teaches.
Alex Newman here, host of the Sentinel Report on Lindale TV. We have some big news for you. The Sentinel Report is moving to a primetime slot on Lindale 1.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Sentinel Report. I am your host, Andrew Muller. We are so excited to have a terrific guest today. We have Howie Klausner. He's the screenwriter for the movie Reagan. And I'll tell you what, folks, I went and saw this movie, not last weekend, but the weekend before. And I was moved. I was moved to tears at the end of the film. I have loved Ronald Reagan most of my life since I was a younger teenager, reading and studying about him. And I felt like this movie just perfectly captured Ronald Reagan, and also shared a side of Reagan that a lot of people need to know about, because I think this can be a great unifying factor for our country if we can get that sort of ideal and character back into our government and our country as a whole. So I'm so excited to have Howie Klausner. As I said, he's the screenwriter for the movie Reagan. He's a veteran Hollywood screenwriter whose career began with Clint Eastwood. We all love Clint Eastwood, a great actor, and the blockbuster film Space Cowboys, which is a fun movie. Tommy Lee Jones is in that as well. And he just nailed it in this movie. I can't say enough good things about it. Howie, thanks for joining the Sentinel Report. How are you doing today?
I'm great, Andrew. Thanks for having me. Thanks for those kind words. Appreciate that.
Oh, well, it's a pleasure to have you on. I want to give folks a little taste of the movie, because I think it's not only a storytelling masterpiece of the Reagan administration, but it's also a visual masterpiece, and how it's written and how it's shot. I think it's really well done. So let's watch a clip from the trailer Reagan, and we'll be back with Howie Klausner to get a reaction.
There's nothing a retired governor can do about the Soviets, but a president, now he can do a thing or two.
Welcome to your life.
I was a lifeguard on a river,
There's no turning back.
and I learned how to read the currents. Not just the ones on the surface, but also the ones deep underneath the water. I am about to start the biggest war of this century, and I'm not gonna fire a single shot.
You're gonna blow up 8 years of diplomacy.
Well, if you think that got their undies in a wad, you just wait.
What did the president know, and when did he know it?
What would you have me do?
I want you to fight.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Wants to rule the world.
Powerful stuff. So Howie, tell me, what led you to be a part of this movie? What attracted you to working on this movie? And really, what attracted you to retelling the story of our president, Ronald Reagan?
Well, it all started with a phone call when Mark Joseph and John Sullivan called me, and they knew that I sort of had a love for Reagan. And just to go back in time a little bit, I grew up in those years, and I was a history guy. I write biopics. That's what I do. I have loved Reagan all along. I was a teacher for a while as well, so I really was able to study him along the way. The other funny part of that is I was a Kennedy Democrat growing up. I didn't particularly care for Ronald Reagan when he first ran for president and lost, and even when he won. But he had me after the assassination attempt, and just the grace that he came back to Washington with. So at that point, when they made that phone call, I said, I would love to write this movie. So that's how I got here.
That's so cool. And so I want to talk about a little bit, correct me if I'm wrong, the origin of the movie. A lot of the facts and storylines that you pulled out came out of Paul Kengor's book, The Crusader, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so
Paul was instrumental in this thing.
So yeah, tell me about that. What led you guys to pick Ken Gore's book, The Crusader? We got the cover there, and it's like Lord of the Rings, right? You watch the movie Lord of the Rings, and they're 3 huge, thick books, right? And there's got to be some stuff you include and some stuff you exclude. Why'd you guys pick Ken Gore's book and his depiction of Reagan? And what was that process like? It was such a big life, a big administration with Reagan. How do you make the decisions of what to include and what not to include? Kind of give us some insight into what that looked like.
Well, you're asking the big question of the process itself, especially when you write a biopic. When you write a biopic, especially a guy who lived the 20th century. I mean, he lived the 20th century. So, if you're going to tell his entire life story, especially this particular man's life story with all the chapters that he had from, he was a college athlete, he was an actor, he was a sports broadcaster, he was a union president, he was a corporate spokesman, he was a governor. Wow, how do you do that? So what you really need with a story like that is, what is your spine? What are you going to follow here? There has to be something that sort of is the backbone of the movie itself. Paul's book brilliantly talks about two things: Reagan's faith, number one, and secondly, his very early on, he was exposed to communism, which is just outright evil. And his entire life was spent trying to find what he called his divine plan, God's divine plan for his life. And truly, he only discovered it by his own words the night he was assassinated, the night he was shot. That he realized that the rest of his life was going to finish off, essentially with the falling of the Berlin Wall. And we can get into that a little bit more. But to return to your question, which is far more important, Paul's book focuses his life story along those two themes. So therefore, those were kind of the lanes that I was able to run in as the screenwriter.
Super cool. I love to hear that. So what are a few of as the screenwriter, maybe you can describe a little bit too, for some of us who don't know a lot about, the behind the scenes working of a film, one, what a screenwriter does and how, important of a role that is in a film. But as the screenwriter, you are a huge player in picking the dialogue and character development in quotes. So what was it like being the screenwriter? What does the screenwriter do? And then maybe what were a few of your favorite pieces of dialogue, Ronald Reagan quotes, that you thought were the most powerful and pertinent to the film?
Well, I think more than anything else, going back to that, what we were just talking about, it's how do I actually depict all these things in a cinematic way for 2 hours and change, when really this thing almost wants to be, a 25-hour limited series on Netflix or something. But to make it a theatrical experience, every screenwriter knows, it's all about conflict, which that's what a heroic journey is, and that's what Reagan's life was. So, as far as what was it like, it was more my biggest challenge was what sort of to not include, and it was really difficult. There were a lot of things, and there were things that we shot that when we will eventually have a DVD with deleted scenes in it. There are some wonderful moments, but the first cut of this movie was 3 hours. So in answer to your question, the biggest challenge of that is to you got to fire bullets and not shotgun. You've got to, every scene has to move something, and it has to convey it. Happily for me, his life gave me that. It was mine not to screw up, really. Favorite lines? Certainly, I think one of the greatest lines he ever uttered is when they wheeled him into surgery, and he looked up at them, weak and under anesthesia, saying, "I hope you're all Republicans," and of course, that is a true statement. And the lead surgeon said, "Today, Mr. President, we're all Republicans." I think more than anything else, that moment is what I wanted when I came to this story, why I wanted to do it, and why I was so driven to do it. Because when we discussed it, when they called me, I made it clear, and they agreed with me. I don't write political commercials. How an artist feels politically should never play into the story that the artist is telling. Now, I happen to love Reagan. I happen to hold all his values dear, but I want to tell a life story. And you said it in the beginning of your introduction, what all of us are desperate for as a country, and certainly the band of brothers that made this movie, is to bring some unity and bring some healing. Put Democrat and Republican stuff aside, and let's just look at a heroic life with plenty of flaws. Oh man, plenty of flaws, plenty of mistakes. The guy was a human being. I wasn't going to write some hero worshiping thing like a superhero. No, so I think really that scene crystallized the whole thing. That, right now you're just a man that needs the healing, says the surgeon. It doesn't matter what your politics is. So when I really think about it, if I was going to single out the one line I love the most, wish I'd come up with it on my own, but that was Ronald Reagan's line.
Yeah, that's incredible. And they called him the great communicator. And I think that was definitely incredible title to have. I think that was definitely warranted and earned. One of my, big takeaways from the film was, I think, the faith of Reagan. And that was really highlighted in the film. I think it was one of the main points of the film, at least for me when watching it. What do you think Ronald Reagan's faith played how did it play a role in his life and his administration? And then why was that such a heavy emphasis in the film?
Well, I think we're all, as we grow older, all we are is an older and more seasoned version of the child that we were. And, Reagan's faith obviously began in childhood. His mother was absolutely instrumental, as was his pastor. Reagan's dad was an alcoholic, and that's a real field of study all its own. The children of alcoholic parents, especially fathers. So Reagan had instilled in him at a very young age that God has a plan for your life. He actually grew up in the Disciples of Christ Church there in Dixon, Illinois. They did not have a lot of money, and he already had the gift of gab and the gift of just being able to present to people, as well as a photographic memory. He was born with a photographic memory. He was doing readings in his church at 9, 10 years old with his mother. And the church would give them a love offering of a Sunday dinner in response to that. So all that is that's the beginning. And one of the key verses he was taught by his pastor was the Second Chronicles verse, "If my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray, I will heal their land." And it is no accident that when he raised his hand to take the oath of President of the United States, that the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court had the Bible open to that verse, and he laid his hand on it. So I think that gives you a couple of bookends right there. His faith was absolutely real. Now, was he a saint? No, he was, as I said, he had things that he regretted in his growing up years, just like all of us, but he still loved God all the way. The things I've heard it said among the many criticisms of, well, he sort of used his faith for political purposes. That's absolutely untrue, that his faith was real.
Yep, absolutely. It certainly was. And I think that a big part of what made him such a strong president was his backbone. And you go back, and I think the film does a great job. There were things I even learned watching it that I thought were incredible. You mentioned his days at the Screen Actors Guild. There was a communist infiltration going on there. He stood up and had backbone and really made a name for himself. And that was a big part of the origins of his political launch. Was, I think, he started to recognize the communist threat to the United States. And then, of course, Reagan, as you guys depict beautifully in the film, worked for GE. And I didn't know that he traveled to all the different factories and met with all the different workers. And that was also a big part of his political career growing. But one of my favorite scenes in the film is when he meets with some of those GOP guys in California, and they ask him, what do you think is the biggest threat to the United States? And they start mentioning all these different things. And he says, no, it's communism in the United States. And they say, get in the game, Reagan. And we saw that in the trailer. Such a powerful scene. So Reagan got in the game. He was successful in his run for the presidency after a failed attempt. You guys, just for the sake of time, couldn't talk about that failed attempt a whole bunch, but I'm sure you saw a lot of that in your research. What did that failed attempt do to Ronald Reagan in his launching for the presidency? Because that's one area that the film just doesn't get to touch on because of the the time limit. But what do you think that failure did in the life and journey of Reagan?
Well, first of all, in the deleted scenes section of the DVD, whenever that does show up, you are going to see more of that. We had to cut things for time, and that was the hardest choice we had to make, was the 76 loss. And let's go back to the faith element of that. That one of the main reasons that Ronald Reagan's visceral hatred of communism is communism is by its nature godless, atheistic, that the state is God. There is no God. That's communism. So as a child, that took him all the way. He saw that legitimate threat in Hollywood and saw it, certainly on the campuses as all that was burning down in the 1960s. So he literally saw this as the fundamental issue for the survival of the United States. So let's go back to your question. I don't want to do a spoiler alert, but when you watch the movie, you will see a moment that did happen where essentially he was assured from on high that he was destined to be the president of the United States for this very reason. So in 1976, when everything was lining up, suddenly, Gerald Ford's presidency was beginning to flag and Reagan was on the rise. It looked like he was going to be the guy. So you got to remember, in his heart and in his mind, he believes God wants him to be the president of the United States. And so when he loses at the primary there at the convention in 1976 in Kansas City, I mean, talk about a gut shot, where you think you have found the purpose of your life and you feel the wind in your sails of God behind you, and here we go. Mm-hmm. No, you're not going to be the president. So I think it is a pivot moment in not only in the movie but in his life, where at the close of that he more or less just resigned himself. Perhaps I was wrong. Well, it turns out that God's timing and our timing are rarely the same, and apparently God's timing was 1980, and that's when it happened.
Beautiful, beautiful. It reminds me of Richard Nixon. He had a quote, I might be butchering it, but it was something along the lines of, a man is not finished when he is defeated, he's finished when he quits. And I don't think Ronald Reagan was a quitter at all, and that's what kept him going. So you talked about God's timing. Before we went live, we talked a little bit about the providential side of the film's release, just as Reagan's release into the White House had a couple bumps in the road. The film did as well. So tell us a little bit about that, because I was surprised to hear that this thing was kind of ready to go during COVID, but things pushed it off. But I think that this is the perfect time for this film to come out. I really, really do. Speak to that, and what are your thoughts?
I think so too, and I'd like to just make sure that I pull the rug out from anyone that thinks otherwise. This movie is not intended to have anything to do with an election. It really isn't. I started this movie in 2010. That's when I wrote the first draft, was in 2010 and early 2011. I've been on this movie for 14 years. I've been a screenwriter for a long time, and they take a while, but they don't take 14 years. So I've been on this thing a while. We literally thought we would be rolling to go about 2013 and 14. A lot of things happened, didn't happen. 2016, yes, 2016 is when we're going to go into production at that. Our first director passed away, John Avildsen, the director of Rocky. He was the original director on the film. He passes away. We stop again. We've got financing problems. We got every problem that every movie ever has, of course. Then we thought 2018, that's when everything's coming together. And then we shoot. Now we're ready to go. We're on the books. I'll never forget, we were scouting the Reagan Ranch up in the Santa Ynez Mountains there, and came down to our hotel. And it turns out everybody's gathered around their TV sets and their phones and everything. Hey, they're shutting the country down because of this COVID thing. So to say that, and then after that, we had there were a couple of other actors who were going to play Reagan, and you know what, that they were not the ones meant to play it. They were fine. They would have been terrific. It was meant to be Dennis Quaid. So then we've got a pandemic, and then the pandemic changes everything we're doing in production. We were lucky to be able to shoot in 2020. As a matter of fact, we were the only major motion picture shooting. And then there's a writer's strike and an actor strike, and it just goes on and on and on. And so finally, we really thought, okay, we'll have all this settled by 2022, and then of course the strike stopped that. So here we are in 2024. So that's a laundry list, and I have left out 3/4 of it, but those are the highlights. That is just, it was obvious the timing was not up to us. It was not up to us.
That's right.
And so here we are, fall of, 6 weeks away from a big election, and here's the movie out there doing what it's doing.
Wonderful. Wow, that's super cool. You mentioned Dennis Quaid and how there's maybe a few different people who were going to play Reagan. We have a picture of the real Ronald Reagan, and then at times when I thought was also the real Ronald Reagan, Dennis Quaid. I've known about Dennis Quaid since Parent Trap. That's when I was first introduced to him in the film, the Disney film, the Lohan twins. And I always loved him. I thought he was a great actor. And when I saw that picture, that was the first picture I ever saw, was him at the ranch with the cowboy hat on. I thought, wow, I never saw that coming. I didn't even know he had that in him. What do you think about Dennis Quaid playing Reagan? And how do you think he did in this role?
Man, I mean, uncanny. Just, it was just, again, hand of God stuff. He was the guy supposed to do it. Dennis told me as we were working, he said, my challenge is not to have a movie of 2 hours of me imitating Ronald Reagan. Because Dennis, actually, when he was growing up, he's a gifted mimic. He's a gifted mimic. He wanted to be. You're too young to remember this guy, I think. But if anyone in your audience over 35 or 40 remembers the great Rich Little, who was the greatest impressionist ever. And when Dennis was a kid, he was watching Rich Little going, I want to do that. So he can imitate anybody. One of the funnier moments on set was when he would just break into a debate conversation between Bill Clinton and Ronald Reagan, because his imitations of each were so incredible. Long story short, he just brought such an energy and a gravitas and a realism and a heart to the other actors, I'm probably not at liberty to say who they were, but that, they would have been great. They were all great actors who were considering it. But again, circumstances happened. They couldn't do it. It was supposed to be Dennis. So I think he absolutely crushed it. I don't know what's become of the politics in my industry, but what I do, well, I do know what's become of the politics, but in a normal world, he would certainly be nominated, and I think he would win the Academy Award for Best Actor next year. We're not holding our breath, but I believe he justifies it with that performance.
I could agree with you more. Another outstanding performance I thought was Penelope Ann Miller did a just terrific job as Nancy Reagan. And I want to ask you about that, because that was something I wasn't expecting, was the love story. I mean, I knew that, Ron and Nancy had a very special relationship, but I honestly was kind of ignorant as to how deep that went, and then the history of Reagan's prior marriage, and how there was some political tension between him and his, first wife, who was an actress. Speak a little bit to what that was like, writing that love story, portraying that on screen, and how that affected Reagan in his life.
Oh, what I wrote was pretty darn good, but what was better was Penelope Ann Miller speaking into it. I can't speak enough about how she elevated our motion picture. She really did, by bringing correctly and historically accurate, as well as personally accurate, the love these two had for one another. They were truly a partnership, but not in some sort of manipulative political partnership. Hey, you do this, I do this, or anything like that. It was like she was the absolute. I'm trying to find the right word without it sounding too churchy, but she was they were just a fabulous biblical marriage. They were just partners, probably to the extent of other people, including, some of their other family, but she was so indispensable to him. So instead of just making this a presidential biopic, I mean, when I really dug into the research myself as to, my heavens, he really, really loved her and adored her. If you watch the scenes from the real funeral of Ronald Reagan, where she at the end is an 80-something-year-old woman literally just falls apart on his casket, kissing it. I mean, if you don't tear up at that, you have no heart. you just don't have one. So that was the story of their life. And I can't high five Penelope enough. She really, part of the process of being a writer is you don't just turn in the script and go shoot it and good luck, because this is the most collaborative art form there is. And the actors have something to say. The director certainly has something to say. The cinematographer has something to say about it. So it's this organic beast, the script, that just keeps moving. And I think Penelope took us from here to here. I truly do, with her depiction of Nancy.
Agreed. For a lot of people, I'm 23 years old. I'm on the younger side. For a lot of people, this is going to be their first really look into Ronald Reagan, because he was president in the 80s. A lot of people, my age, born in the late 90s, early 2000s, maybe have just seen clips of Reagan here or there. Unfortunately, our history books don't do a super good job of telling the true story of our heroes in American life. So they're not getting Reagan, the truest, fullest Reagan, out of their history books. So why do you think this film is important for my generation, for younger people? What would be your hope, your great takeaway for people my age and younger when they are introduced to Ronald Reagan?
You are coming of age in, I'm the most optimistic guy you ever met, but I think these are the darkest days in the history of the United States of America. And among the many, many reasons is we have just dismissed what we came from as a nation. And, we don't need to, we don't really need to unpack all the craziness that's going on right now. But, I've got kids about your age, and we have the same conversations. And I think Dennis said it the best. I wish I could lay claim to this line. It's a great line. Dennis said, for everybody born before 1985, they're going to remember how great we really were and are. For everybody born after 1985, they can be reminded of what we can and must be again. And I think that's it. I mean, it's time. It's your turn. It's your generation. And I don't think anybody can make the argument that the course we're on, that the end of my generation has handed you, is a good one. And our movie is not going to change the world, but if our movie can inspire somebody like yourself, this upcoming generation, lay aside DNR stuff, just put it all aside. Don't forget, Reagan was a Democrat and a Republican. And what his real gift in life was to unify people, because he understood them and he liked them, and he didn't dislike somebody because of their politics. I think that's where we are right now, that our real charge is one of unity. Can we just start talking to one another instead of at one another?
Amen. Couldn't agree with you more, and very well said. We're just about out of time, but I want to end with just a plea for people to go and see this movie. It's so powerful. You also need to go see it on the big screen. There's something about going and seeing a movie in the movie theater, and that I think is just so unique to America. We have a great history of filmmaking in this country. This country has made some of the best films all the way back to Ben-Hur and before it. I mean, just a great, rich cinematic history we have in this nation, and going to the movies has kind of died off, and I don't think that should happen at all. We need to bring back going to the movie theater. It's so much better than streaming on your couch at home. You need to go and see it. So final thoughts, Howie, how can people support the film, and what are your final takeaways for us before we sign off?
Well, just what you said. Go see it. Go see it, because what we're really doing with that, what the audience is doing with that, is making a statement. You're probably aware of some of the forces against us. It's real. There's just so much division in this country. We get that, but the audiences that are responding to this thing with tears and joy and cheering and all that kind of stuff, it's an American movie. We're not a Republican movie. We're an American movie. And so that's it. The best thing you can do is just go see it. Go see it in the theaters. That means so much. And not only just, you're not doing us a favor there, you're going to like it more.
Couldn't agree more. So it's the Reagan movie. It's out in theaters right now. You can go to Reagan Reagan.movie for ticket information. That's Reagan.movie. They're also on Instagram, Facebook, all the social medias at Reagan Movie. That's at Reagan Movie. You got to go see it before it gets out of theaters. And I would encourage you, I'm going to buy the DVD. You need to as well when it comes out, and give it to somebody, host a watch party at your house, but do that after you see it in theaters. Howie, thank you so much for joining us on the Sentinel Report. Appreciate you, and God bless you, sir.
Andrew, thank you. Really enjoyed it.
All right. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode of the Sentinel Report. You can see more of our work and great episodes like this at libertysentinel.org. That's Liberty, SENTINEL.org. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.